When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I remember that moment so clearly. The kitchen was warm that afternoon. Sunlight was coming through the window. She was standing by the sink with her arms crossed. And I just stood there, looking at her, looking at my son who couldn't meet my eyes. And I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that happens when you feel something break inside you. The kind of smile that tries to hold everything together, even when your heart is falling apart. I had lived in that house for 12 years. 12 years of helping raise my grandchildren. 12 years of cooking meals and cleaning, and being there for every school pickup and every doctor's appointment. And now she was telling me it was time to go. The funny thing is that I knew it was coming. Deep down, I had known for months. There were small signs. The way she would look at me sometimes. The way conversations would stop when I walked into a room. The way my son started making excuses to be away from home more often. But I didn't want to see it. Because where else could I go? My husband had passed away 6 years ago. Our old house had been sold to help pay for medical bills. This was my home. But that afternoon, standing in that kitchen with the sun on my face, something changed inside me. I looked at my daughter-in-law, and I saw a woman who was tired. Tired of sharing her kitchen. Tired of sharing her husband's attention. Tired of having an extra person in her space. And I understood. I didn't agree. But I understood. So I smiled. And I said, okay, I'll start looking for a place. She looked surprised. I think she was expecting me to fight. To cry. To make a scene. But I had learned a long time ago that fighting doesn't solve everything. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply accept what is happening. Even when it breaks your heart. I walked out of that kitchen and went to my room. And for the first time in 12 years, I closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed. I looked around at all the things that told the story of my life. The photo of my husband on the nightstand. The quilt my mother had made. The books I had read and reread over the years. And I started to cry, not because I was angry, but because I was tired. Tired of being a burden. Tired of feeling like I was in the way. Tired of watching my son struggle between his wife and his mother. And I realized that maybe leaving was the best thing I could do for everyone. Maybe it was time to let them have their life. Maybe it was time for me to figure out what my life looked like now. Let me tell you about my family. My name is Margaret. But everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 67 years old. I was born in a small town in the Midwest. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone. Where you can't go to the grocery store without running into someone you know. Where church on Sunday is the highlight of the week. That I married my husband, James. When I was 22, he was a good man. A quiet man. The kind of man who didn't say much but showed his love through actions. He would fix things around the house without being asked. He would bring me coffee in bed every morning. He would hold my hand when we walked. We had 41 years together. 41 years of ups and downs. 41 years of laughter and tears. And then he was gone. We had one child. A son. His name is Daniel. He was our pride and joy. When he was born, James cried. It was the only time I ever saw my husband cry. He held that baby in his arms and he said, "Look at him, Maggie. Look at what we made." And from that moment on, Daniel was everything to us. Daniel was a good child. He was smart and kind and thoughtful. He did well in school. He made friends easily. He never gave us any trouble. When he was in college, he met a girl named Sarah. She was beautiful and ambitious. She had big dreams and a plan for her life. Daniel was in love. And we were happy for him. Sarah was different from us. Her family had money. Her parents were doctors and lawyers. They lived in a big house with a pool and a tennis court. Sarah grew up with everything she could ever want. And she wanted more. That's the thing about Sarah. She was never satisfied. There was always something more to achieve. Something better to have. Something bigger to chase. When Daniel and Sarah got married, I was so happy. I remember that day so clearly. The church was beautiful. Sarah wore white. Daniel looked so handsome in his suit. And I cried. I cried happy tears. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it's supposed to be. Your child grows up and finds love and builds a family. And you get to be a part of it. The first few years of their marriage were good. They lived in a small apartment. Sarah was working at a marketing firm. Daniel was finishing his residency at the hospital. They were busy, but they were happy. And when Sarah got pregnant, I was overjoyed. I was going to be a grandmother. I had waited for this moment my whole life. When James and I talked about the future, we always talked about grandchildren. James would say, "Maggie, you're going to be the best grandmother in the world." And I believed him. I wanted to be that grandmother. The one who baked cookies and read bedtime stories and took the kids to the park. When little Emma was born, it was one of the happiest days of my life. I held that tiny baby in my arms, and I couldn't stop crying. She was so perfect. Her little fingers and her little toes and that soft baby smell. I had been there for every moment of it. When Sarah was in labor, I stayed by her side. I held her hand and I told her she was doing great. I saw my son become a father. And I saw his heart grow 10 times bigger. The next few years were busy. Sarah went back to work. Daniel was working long hours at the hospital. So I helped. I helped with everything. I would come over to their apartment and help with Emma. Cook meals and clean the kitchen. I would do laundry and organize closets. I didn't think of it as work. It was just what family did. You help each other. Then James got sick. It happened so fast. One day he was fine, and the next day he wasn't. We went to the doctor, and the doctor said it was cancer. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that doesn't give you much time. I remember sitting in that doctor's office and feeling the floor drop out from underneath me. It was like the world had ended. My James. My gentle, quiet James. He was dying. The next 6 months were hard. So hard. I spent every moment I could with him. I slept in a chair next to his hospital bed. I held his hand. I read to him. I told him I loved him 100 times a day. And when he finally passed, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had spent 41 years with him. He was my whole world. And suddenly, I was alone. Daniel and Sarah were there for me. They really were. They helped with the funeral arrangements. They made sure I was eating and sleeping. They invited me to come stay with them for a while. Just until I was back on my feet. I was hesitant at first. I didn't want to intrude. But I didn't have anywhere else to go. Our house was too big and too empty without James. So I moved in with Daniel and Sarah. And for a while it was good. I helped with Emma, who was 3 years old then. I cooked dinner. I kept the house clean. I tried to make myself useful. I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to be a help. Then Tyler was born. That was another beautiful day. He was a boy. A chubby little boy with a full head of dark hair. And I held him, and I thought James would have loved this. He would have loved this little boy. And I cried, but this time they were happy tears. Because even though James was gone, his legacy was still here. His family. Our family. As the years passed, our family grew. The children grew up. Daniel got promoted at the hospital. Sarah became the head of her department at work. They bought a bigger house in a nice neighborhood. And I stayed. I was still there, in their home, helping with the children, cooking the meals, keeping the house running. Looking back, I think that's where the problem started. Not with the move or the promotions, but with me not having a life of my own. I had been so focused on being a help to them that I forgot to be my own person. I stopped having friends. I stopped doing things for myself. My whole identity became wrapped up in being Daniel's mother and Emma and Tyler's grandmother. And slowly, quietly, Sarah began to resent me. It wasn't obvious at first. It was small things. She would sigh when I was in the kitchen. She would make comments about the way I folded the laundry. She would say things like, "I didn't ask you to do that, Maggie." The word Maggie. She always called me Maggie. Never mom or mother. Always Maggie. As time went on, the tension grew. And it wasn't just Sarah. Daniel started changing too. He became more distant. More quiet. When I would try to talk to him, he would avoid my eyes. He would make excuses to leave the room. He would say he was tired or that he had work to do. And I knew something was wrong. I tried to fix it. I tried so hard. I started doing everything Sarah's way. I stopped putting things in the kitchen where I thought they should go. I started following her rules. I stopped baking cookies because Sarah said they made a mess. I stopped reading to the children at bedtime because Sarah said it interrupted their routine. I gave up everything that made me feel like myself. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. Sarah would get upset if I was in the living room when she came home. So I started staying in my room. Sarah would get upset if I was in the kitchen at the same time as her. So I started waiting until after she was done. Sarah would get upset if I did law on the wrong day. So I stopped doing laundry altogether. I tried to be invisible. I tried to be helpful but also unseen. It was exhausting. But I kept telling myself, this is what family does. You sacrifice. You compromise. You do what you need to do to keep the peace. The worst part was the children. Emma and Tyler. They were my heart. They were the reason I kept going. When I woke up every morning, they were what I looked forward to. Their smiles. Their laughter. Their little voices. I loved them more than I had ever loved anything in my life. But Sarah started pulling them away too. She started sending them to after-school programs instead of letting me pick them up. She started hiring babysitters instead of leaving them with me. She started making rules about what they could eat, and when they could play and how late they could stay up. And I was always the one who broke those rules. Grandma let us have cookies before dinner. Grandma let us stay up late. Grandma said we could watch another show. Sarah would give me that look. The look that said, you're doing it wrong. You're always doing it wrong. And I would apologize. I would say I was sorry. I would say it wouldn't happen again. But it would happen again. Because I couldn't help myself. I wanted to spoil them. I wanted to give them joy. I wanted to be the grandmother I had always dreamed of being. The turning point was one evening in November. It had been a long day. I had made one of Daniel's favorite meals, pot roast with carrots and potatoes. It was a recipe passed down from my grandmother. Every time I made it, I remembered my mother in her kitchen. I remembered her hands. I remembered how she would hum while she cooked. The kitchen smelled wonderful. The children were excited. They loved pot roast night. Daniel came in from work and he smiled when he smelled it. He said, "Mom, it smells like my childhood in here." And I was so happy. For just one moment, everything felt right. But then Sarah came home. She had had a bad day at work. She was in a bad mood. I could tell from the way she walked into the house. She saw the pot roast and her face went hard. She said, "Maggie, I told you we were trying to eat healthier." I said, "I'm sorry. I just thought." "No," she said. "You didn't think. You never think." Daniel said, "Sarah, it's just a meal. It's not a big deal." She turned on him. "It is a big deal. She's always doing this. She's always overstepping. This is my house, Daniel. My kitchen. And she can't just do whatever she wants." I felt my face go hot. The children were at the table, watching everything. Emma looked scared. Tyler looked confused. And I felt so small. So completely and utterly small. I said, "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'll clean everything up. You don't have to eat it. I'll put it away." She said, "Just go to your room, Maggie. Please. Just go to your room." So I went. I walked away from the table. I walked away from my grandchildren. I walked away from my son. And I went to my room and I sat on my bed and I cried. I cried for a long time. I cried until I had no tears left. And then I sat there in the silence and I thought about what my life had become. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. I had no money. I had no place to go. I had no life of my own. I was trapped. Trapped in a house where I wasn't wanted. Trapped in a family that didn't want me. Trapped in a body that was getting older and more tired every day. That I thought about James. I thought about his smile. His gentle laugh. The way he would hold my hand when I was sad. And I said to him, even though he couldn't hear me, "James, what do I do? What do I do?" And in that moment, I made a decision. I decided I would leave. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't argue. I would just go. I would find a small apartment somewhere. I would get a job. I would figure out how to be a person again. I would stop being a burden. I would stop being invisible. I would find myself. But the strange thing about life is that it rarely goes the way you plan. While I was sitting in my room making my plans, something else was happening in that kitchen. Something that would change everything. Something that would rip my family apart in a way I could never have imagined. The next morning, I got up early. I made coffee. I sat in the kitchen alone and watched the sun come up. The house was quiet. The children were still sleeping. Daniel was still sleeping. Sarah was still sleeping. And I was there, in the quiet, feeling like a ghost in my own home. I had decided not to tell anyone about my plans. I would just leave. I would write a note. I would wait until they were all gone and I would pack my things and I would leave. But something made me wait. Something told me to stay just a little longer. That day was Saturday. The children had nowhere to go. Daniel was off from work. Sarah was home. It was supposed to be a family day, but it didn't feel like a family day. It felt like every other day. Quiet. Strained. Full of things that weren't being said. I made pancakes. It was my way of apologizing. I made pancakes with blueberries because Emma loved blueberries. I made pancakes with chocolate chips because Tyler loved chocolate chips. I set the table. I put out syrup and butter. And I called everyone to come eat. The children came first. They were excited. Emma hugged my legs. Tyler climbed into his chair. And for a little while, everything felt okay. Daniel came next. He kissed me on the cheek. He said, "Thank you, Mom." And then Sarah came. She didn't say anything. She just sat down. We ate in silence. It was the worst breakfast of my life. The pancakes were good. But the silence was heavy. It pressed down on me. It made it hard to breathe. I kept looking at Daniel, hoping he would say something. Hoping he would stand up for me. But he just stared at his plate. Sarah finished her breakfast. She stood up and said, "We need to talk, Daniel." Privately. And then she left. Daniel looked at me. There was something in his eyes. Something I had never seen before. It was guilt. Deep, heavy guilt. And I knew something was about to change. Something was about to break. He said, "I'll be right back, Mom." And he followed her out of the room. The children stayed with me. Emma was 6 now. Tyler was 4. They were still so young. They didn't understand what was happening. They just knew that something was wrong. They could feel it in the air. Children always know. They feel everything. Emma said, "Grandma, why is Mommy mad?" I said, "Mommy is just tired, sweetheart. She's had a long week." Tyler said, "Why is Daddy sad?" And that was the question that stopped me. Tyler was 4 years old. And he could already see the sadness in his father's eyes. How long? Had he been carrying his own burden? And I realized in that moment that I had been so focused on my own pain that I had forgotten to look at his that I heard their voices. Sarah's voice first. Loud. Unforgiving. Then Daniel's voice. Quieter. I couldn't hear what they were saying. But I could hear the tone. The anger. The frustration. The disappointment. Then I heard something else. A crash. Something falling. And then Daniel came back into the kitchen. His face was red. His hands were shaking. And he was holding a piece of paper. He said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." I said, "What is it, Daniel? What's wrong?" He said, "It's about Dad. It's about why you came to live with us." I felt my blood go cold. I said, "What are you talking about?" Sarah came in behind him. She was crying. Sarah never cried. I had never seen her cry before. And I knew in that moment that something terrible was about to happen. Something that would change everything. Daniel sat down at the table. He put his head in his hands. He was crying too. Crying like a little boy. Crying like he had cried when he was small and had fallen off his bike and scraped his knee. But this was different. This wasn't a scraped knee. This was something deep. Something that had been buried for a long time. He said, "Mom, Dad didn't die of cancer." I said, "What are you talking about?" Of course he did. I was there. I was with him at the hospital. Daniel shook his head. He said, "No, Mom. He had cancer. But that's not what killed him. He had a stroke. A massive stroke. And the doctor said that if we had gotten him to the hospital sooner, he might have survived." I said, "But we did. We took him to the hospital. We did everything." "No," Daniel said. "No, you didn't." I did. I was the one who found him. I was the one who called the ambulance. I was the one who went to the hospital. You were gone. I said, that's not true. I was there. I was with him every day. Daniel looked at me. There was so much pain in his eyes. He said, Mom, do you remember what happened the night he died? Do you remember where you were? I tried to remember. I tried so hard. But the memories were fuzzy. They were blurry. They were like a dream I couldn't quite hold on to. Daniel said, You were at home, Mom. He called for you. He asked for you. But you were at home. You said you were tired. You said you needed rest. So you came home. And while you were gone, he had a stroke. And I was the one who found him. I felt the world tilt underneath me. I felt like I was falling down into a dark hole with no bottom. I had forgotten. I had blocked it out. The guilt had been so heavy that I had just erased it from my memory. Daniel said, I've been carrying this for 6 years, Mom. 6 years of watching you blame yourself for something that wasn't your fault. 6 years of watching you feel guilty about something that couldn't have been prevented. And I could tell you. I couldn't because I was ashamed. Sarah reached for Daniel's hand. She said, I didn't want you to know, Maggie. That's why I wanted you to leave. Because I couldn't stand the guilt. Every time I looked at you, I saw him. I saw the way he died. I saw the way Daniel blamed himself. And I blamed myself. I blamed myself for not being there. For not doing more. Daniel was still crying. He said, Sarah wanted me to tell you. She wanted me to come clean. But I couldn't. Because if I told you, it would make it real. And if it was real, then we would both have to face what happened. I sat in that chair, and I felt like my world was falling apart. Everything I thought I knew. Everything I thought I remembered. It was all wrong. All of it. The story I had been telling myself. The story about how I had been a good wife. A good mother. A good widow. It was all wrong. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just sat there. The children were still at the table. They were quiet. They had stopped eating. They were just watching. Waiting. But they knew that something important was happening. Then Emma got down from her chair. She walked over to me and she put her little hand on my face. She said, Grandma, are you okay? And that broke me. That completely broke me. I pulled her into my lap. I held her close. And I cried. I cried for James. I cried for Daniel. I cried for Sarah. I cried for myself. But most of all, I cried for the years we had wasted. I said, Daniel, it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. Your father loved you. He knew you loved him. He never blamed you for anything. He was so proud of you. So incredibly proud. Daniel said, I know, Mom. I know. I just couldn't let go of the guilt. I couldn't let go of the thought that if I had just done something different, he might still be here. I said, I spent 6 years thinking the same thing. 6 years blaming myself for not being there. 6 years wondering what I could have done differently. And now I know. It wasn't my fault either. It was just what happened. It was life. It was a terrible, sad, beautiful thing called life. Sarah sat down at the table. She was still crying. She said, I'm sorry, Maggie. I was so awful to you. I was so mean and cold. And I'm so sorry. I looked at her. I saw the regret in her eyes. I saw the pain she had been carrying. I saw the woman she was, not the woman I had made her out to be. And I forgave her. I forgave her right then. Because forgiveness is not about the other person. It's about yourself. It's about letting go of the weight you've been carrying. That I said, Sarah, I forgive you. But you need to forgive yourself too. You need to let go of this guilt. It's been eating you alive. And it's been eating all of us alive. She said, I don't know how. I don't know how to let it go. I said, we'll figure it out together. We'll do it together. As a family. That day we talked. We talked for hours. We talked about James. We talked about the past. We talked about all the things we had never said. It was hard. It was so incredibly hard. But it was also beautiful. Because for the first time in 6 years, we were being honest. The children didn't understand everything that was happening. They were too young. But they understood that something good was happening. Emma brought me her favorite stuffed animal. It was a little bunny with floppy ears. She said, Here, Grandma. This will make you feel better. And Tyler made me a picture. A picture of our family. Crude crayon drawings of stick figures. But it was perfect. That night, Daniel came to my room. He knocked on the door. He said, "Mom, can I come in?" And I said yes. He sat on the edge of my bed. He looked at the photo of James. He picked it up. He said, "I miss him so much." I said, "I know, baby. I know." He said, "Every day I think about him. Every day, I wonder what he would say, what he would do, if he would be proud of me." I said, "Daniel, your father was the proudest man I ever knew. He was proud of you from the moment you were born. He used to say that you were the best thing he ever did. And he meant it." Daniel said, "Do you think he would forgive me for not saving him?" I said, "There's nothing to forgive, Daniel. He didn't die because of anything you did. He died because life is fragile. Life is uncertain. And sometimes, the people we love are taken from us. And all we can do is keep living, keep loving, keep honoring them by being the best version of ourselves." Daniel put his head on my shoulder. And for the first time in 6 years, he let himself cry. He let himself feel the pain he had been holding inside for so long. And I held him. I held my son. And I let him cry. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. Sarah started being kinder. She started saying thank you. She started including me in decisions. She started acting like I was part of the family. And I started being more open. I started telling them what I needed. I started setting boundaries. I started being my own person. I started going for walks in the morning. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at the local community center. I made friends. People who liked me for me. Not because I was someone's mother or someone's grandmother. But because I was Maggie. Just Maggie. And I started writing. I started writing letters to James. Letters about the things I was experiencing. The things I was feeling. The things I was learning. It was my way of staying connected to him. My way of keeping his memory alive. One day, Sarah came to me. She said, "Maggie, I want to tell you something." I said, "Okay." She sat down. She said, "I've been going to therapy. And I've been learning a lot about myself. About why I push people away. About why I need to be in control. And I realized something." I said, "What did you realize?" She said, "I realized that I was afraid. Afraid that if I let you in, you would try to take over. Afraid that if I let Missile love you, I would lose you. Like I lost my own mother." I didn't know that Sarah had lost her mother. She never talked about it. She never talked about her family at all. But she told me that night. She told me about her mother's death. About how she was only 19. About how her father remarried quickly and forgot about her. About how she had been carrying that pain for so long. And I held her. I held my daughter-in-law. And I let her cry. Sometimes, the people who push us away are the ones who need us the most. Sometimes, the people who seem the strongest are the ones who are the most broken. And sometimes, all it takes is one honest conversation to change everything. That was 3 years ago. Today, I'm 70 years old. I live in a small apartment not far from Daniel and Sarah's house. I have my own space. My own life. My own friends. But I'm still part of their family.